Good evening. Thank you for joining us. If you please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have no requests to speak at open forum, so we'll go right to presentations, and we're going to start with our Raymond Holiday production presentation.
Sure. I'd like to introduce Mr. Waltz, who's the teacher, Ryan Schalk, and Connor Wheeler.
Well, thank you for having us back again. And I just want to introduce the entire class. First, we have 11 students in the Raymond class. It's our fourth year that we've had this partnership with Raymond, and you're going to see part of what we do in class, which is one of the challenges that they give us as part of the partnership. I have Kelsey Cowan, Braden Easton Willens, Brock Harvey, Devin Houck, Ariana Larson, Devin Martinez, Jonathan Reynolds, Carter Richter, Ryan Schalk, Tyler Whedon, and Connor Wheeler. And Ryan and Connor are here tonight to share some of the work that they did in class. So each year, Raymond comes to our classroom and shares with the class a holiday project they want displayed at the Robinson Museum. So I'm just going to kind of go over a little bit about what they request of us. The first thing they give us is a design statement, and our goal is to design and fabricate a holiday sculpture to be displayed at the Robinson Museum, home for the holiday celebration, to represent both Sidney High School and the Raymond Corporation. And then they give us a theme, and this year, and our themes are quite challenging, was it had to be themed around a 100-year anniversary or a diamond anniversary, because they're celebrating 100 years of production in New York. So, so each year they give us a theme. We have to come up with some type of holiday display, and they give us some constraints. And the constraints were it cannot be a tree. It must be different than the past 3 years. It must stand by itself. It must be transportable and lifted. Thank you, Mr. Bullock, Mr. Stenta, for transporting to the museum in the back of a pickup truck. The dimensions can't be more than 8 feet wide, 4 feet deep, and 8 feet wide. So and it has to represent both Sidney High School and Raymond Corporation. So there's a lot to think about that, and these two gentlemen here are going to kind of take you through the design process that they had to go through as part of class, and then talk about some of the things that they experienced and show you the final project. Do you want to go over there and talk about it? Okay, so if everyone wants to just come over here, we'll talk about the...
So first off, we start with sketches of our thoughts on the diamond and what we came up with and what we think we want it to look like, and then we progress there and then comes to of course, first we started off with sketches. Then we had to find out how long, how short, yeah, so we had to find out the dimensions of it, and there's some right here, one right there, and the diamond. There was a little trouble with the diamond because we kind of messed up the measurements of it, but we finally got it done. What we started off with the diamond was we drew it on a piece of paper, and then we cut it out, and we put it on a piece of metal, and then we would take we call it plasma cutter, and it uses electricity cut through metal. It's actually really cool. But you cut through it, grind it, make sure that it fits all the dimensions of it, and then we weld together, and that took a little bit of time because we messed up some of the dimensions. So there's some flaws in it, but she turned out good, I think.
Yeah, I just want to be like working with these companies. So it took a while to figure out what we were going to do. Because the idea was that was just one male and one female, and that takes a while to figure out, because we both were all thinking, how do we make it look different? And a few ways is just noses, and the man obviously the top hat, and the female obviously has the Santa hat. And, it was complicated, let's just say that. It took a lot, because sometimes we only like 40 minutes of class every period, and then you're done at a certain time, we'll get Christmas break eventually too. So, some of it's a little sloppy, but like, we had to come up with different ideas of, like the eyes and all that, and how we can make it look differently from each other. And with the 100 symbol, I honestly don't know working on that. I get the idea of that. That's basically it.
We did it pretty good. That's not right.
Honestly.
You have any questions? Yeah, what's 100 represent? On the 100-year anniversary. Of the production. Any other ones?
I can tell you, and Mr. Senna can tell you, that this is extremely heavy. Sharp, to Roberson and out of Roberson is his reference, and,
I was gonna say, next year's our time to do the lead.
There's where it could go.
Now, is all of this part of the display?
Yes, sir.
Not all, and not this and not that, those are both from last week.
And some in the
Yeah, so the first year, so their fourth year, the first year we did the gingerbread men in the box. We had a lot of help from Raymond with the boxes. They actually brought the pieces, all plastic cut it out. We made the bow and the gingerbread men and the snow at the top. And then the second year was, I believe, the dream catcher, and that was during COVID. So we were in a hybrid situation. We had 2 teams of kids working on it, so it was quite challenging trying to get all the pieces together. And but they did a great job putting together. And then the next theme was motivation, innovation. So they had to come up with something that was innovative and Christmassy, holiday theme to display. And then this was this year. And there was definitely some interesting things that, and why we selected some of the materials out, like the faces on the snowmen were actually punched out parts from fork trucks, so they gave us a bunch of scrap pieces. But like a mustache, some of it kind of evolved as they went through. And the hats were all cut out freehand, so they had a big plastic cutter and trace of magic marker line.
very hard.
Yeah, it's a lot of skill. I mean, we did this starting, I think we started on October 1st and had it be at the museum like November 10th, roughly. So they only had about 6 weeks of time to work on it. And we had a team of 11, we were split into groups, and each of them took a section, and then sometimes you get frustrated, you have to walk away and come back. And Connor had mentioned about dimensions, and one of the things that was challenging is the top plate was, easy to trace and cut, and then trying to get all your angles lined up and everything to match, you realize that they had imperfections in their cutting and had to figure things out, but that was part of that process, going back and, what do we have to do to fix it? What do we have to do to, make it work? So they came up with the angle iron and outside the comfort of some of their mistakes. So, but that was part of the learning process.
Yeah, when you walk into the Roberson Museum, they had a bunch of small trinkets that were made too, right? Small little trees.
Yeah.
Just little reindeer, little cabins type of deal, that were in the front lawn. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yes.
The 5th grade had a field trip to Roberson, and we were there for other things, but what was nice is we still got to go around and see all the different trees, and we did see it, and I have to tell you that the 5th graders were very impressed with all the trees.
And the director of Roberson was very proud to tell us to make sure that we saw that this was from Sidney and that it was representative of Sidney. So, good job.
And that was kind of the final point. We got to take a trip to the museum in December, and we got to see the work on display. And Mr. Santa got us some pizza for lunch. It was nice to walk around the museum. So kind of neat to see something that you built and how it's displayed. science museum, and they looked at it. Quite an honor, so. Yeah, the Ranger is actually built, I have my 10th grade class, my first grade class, we go above the unit, and one of my students got pretty skilled pretty quick, so he built that and somehow got promoted into display. So they did a bunch of yard recording, so we did not run down here, so hoping it gets taken home.
We're gonna start auctioning these off.
Very nice.
All right, thank you.
Oh, that's not nice.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic as always. Can't wait to see you next year. Thank you. All right, next we have the DCMO BOCES capital project presentation.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Bob Avery. Bob Avery is from DCMO BOCES that has worked from really the creation of this, back when we learned about it back in November with the capital project, spent a tremendous amount of time on it. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Avery and to present the BOCES capital project.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to share this information with you. My name is Bob Avery. I'm the Director of Services for DCMO. One of my responsibilities as Director of Services is to oversee a number of services that Sidney participates in. But I also oversee our operations and maintenance, or buildings and grounds department, and I'm very intimately involved with capital projects. So that's where I'm coming at this from, rather than from the programmatic side. Mr. Dewey apologizes for not being able to be here. He had a significant back nerve issue that actually he just got out of the hospital yesterday from. He was there over the weekend. So he's at home recovering from that. So you're stuck with just me. As even Mr. Bullock said, I'm here to share with you the concept of what we would like to do, which is to take a capital project proposal, ideally with the support of all 16 districts in the region, to the voters to address some critical needs that we have identified. And we would ideally a timeline to be able to do that in March. We know that that's a compressed timeline, but our timing is so that we have a design phase and then a CD approval phase so that we can begin construction in the spring of 24 with the hopes with the goal of having the phase 1 completed and ready for students in the fall of 25. So that's kind of driving our timeline. Slide, please. We have basically identified two critical sets of needs that are driving this project. The first and most important is programmatic needs within the region, specifically students who are experiencing increased mental health needs and who are struggling in traditional classrooms. The second piece is to address physical plant needs that we have with our buildings. The main core of our buildings were built 50 years ago, so we are starting to experience issues with some of those. The physical plant issues, roofs, driveways, parking lots, all of those sorts of things, and I'll get into those later. And as I said, we're hoping for a vote in March. The needs, first and foremost, in terms of programs and services for students, we're seeing a demand for these types of services. Our current programs, we have a Lighthouse program. That is a short-term therapy intensive program for students to get them in on a 30, 60, 90-day window and get them back into the classroom, whether it's at the BOCES or in Sidney or one of the other component districts. These are students who are in crisis. There is some academic programs involved in this, but it's really focused on the therapeutic side to get them and their heads back ready to go back into the classroom. Our Crossroads program is a more longer-term program. Still has a therapy component to it, but it is more academic components built into that. That is a year-long program. Right now, our Crossroads program is designed for our high school students. We're also seeing a need for new programs and services that we don't offer. Services that districts are sending students out of the region to get programming for. And we just don't have the programming capacity in place to be able to meet those needs. Slide. This slide, I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to tell you what's there. These three programs, Lighthouse, Crossroads, and Pathways, there's a description of each of those programs. Those are what we collectively are calling our Therapeutic Learning Center. These are the programs that would be housed in the facilities that I'll be talking about here in a moment. Slide. So how do we know about the needs? We have seen at DCMO an increase of 50 special education students, including a few that are currently waitlisted and enrolled in DCMO special education classes this year compared to last year. An increase of 50 in 1 year. We're also seeing an increase in the severity of needs among students that are both being served at the BOCES, as well as those that are in the component districts. We have a TLC pilot program in the Norwich campus, the Pole campus building. That has already filled up. We do not have a pilot program started yet at the Herald campus. That program opened up last spring and it quickly filled. As soon as we had it staffed, we had students in it, and we currently have students waitlisted. So we'd like to expand the programs and provide those opportunities for students in both of our campuses. As I said, we have a number of students that are receiving services outside of the region, which means that there are transportation costs, there are transportation time issues, whether it's a transportation cost incurred by the district or whether it's something that the parents have. You have students coming into Sydney and then turn around and go out on a different bus, and how long are they on? Is that good for kids? We believe it's not, so we'd like to bring the programs closer to where the students are. It also provides proximity for outside support agencies that are in our region, that they would only have to travel to one of our two campuses instead of having to travel outside the region, because you have to pay those costs for them, right? They don't travel from Norwich to Binghamton for free. That's part of the cost that's built into the program. Slide, please. In terms of specifics on the needs, our Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Services, Ginger Rinaldo, as well as our former Interim Director of Special Education, Fred Bragan, has been in contact with the CSE chairpersons as well as principals over the last few months, over the fall. This has come up in principals meetings, CSE chair meetings, and they discussed what the needs are. They've identified 25 students in the region, the principals, the CSE chairs, and as well as DCMO staff have identified 25 students that are currently not being served by programs that would benefit from one of these three types of programs. About half of them are enrolled in other programs at DCMO, and about half are still in component districts. As I said, the Lighthouse program only exists in a pilot state at the Pole campus. The program is full, and at the time we put this together, it was about a month ago, there were 2 or 3 students on wait list. So there are students, because it is a short-term program, students are moving in and out. I'm not sure what the current wait list is. We also have learned that there are a number of students at the primary grade levels, K through 3, who are experiencing, who need specialized programming for autism diagnoses. We don't have that sort of programming available. There are about 16 students that would benefit from such programming. And I talked about Pathways being a high school program. There are identified 15 to 16 middle school age students who would benefit from that program as well. So we'd like to expand that to include middle school students. Slide. So we've developed a project in 2 phases. And I'll let you know why it's in two-phase. There's a couple of reasons for it to be in two-phase, but one of the biggest drivers is the fact that you are still paying on the current debt from our last project that was built in 2008, 2009, right? That referendum of 2006. The last payment for that project is due in August of 2027, so the 27-28 school year. That debt falls off. You don't want to start a new project before that, so you want to maintain, just as you do locally, maintain a fairly consistent budget for your capital project needs, right? So phase 2 is put off so that the debt service for that would not kick in until the existing debt falls off. Phase 1, we believe it's a more critical programmatic need, and to address it, we think that there's going to be a 3-year gap if everything were to go according to plan, where there would be an overlap of new debt on top of the existing debt. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Phase 1 then focuses on students. What are the student needs? The Therapeutic Learning Center would be built on each campus, and we would also address a need with age-appropriate playground, play space area for students with special needs. And I'll show you what I mean with that in a moment. This slide shows our 2 campuses, Lowell campus on the left, the Harold campus on the right. In the red rectangles on each campus, you will see marked TLC. That space is the space designated for a 5,000 square foot building that is in close proximity to the common areas of the building that students need to access, specifically the gymnasiums and the cafeteria. The whole campus is at the top of the screen there in the center, and in the Harold campus, it's right below where the TLC is. Also on the map, you will note that there are circled in blue on the left. This is where the new play space would be designated. And then at the Harold campus in the square on the right by the main entrance. I do want to note that the pilot program for the Lighthouse program, the TLC, at Lowell campus is in the, pardon me, I'm going to come up closer. On the far left of the building is the E-wing closest to the road. Closest to the road on the left.
Here, oh, down
Down there, yep.
Sorry.
And then at the bottom of that, right there, it's on the first floor. That's the only two-story part of the building. So when those students need to get to the gymnasium or cafeteria, they have to go up the stairs and then through the whole building to get to the cafeteria and the gym at the other end of the building. What we have learned with that is that there is some significant issues that arise that have to be dealt with in terms of behaviors interacting with other students. Hence the desire to build those the TLC buildings close to where they need to be without having to interact with the rest of the building. Because we're encouraging too many behavior issues among the students in that program at the current time during that transition time. Yes, sir.
Are those buildings separate or are they going to be connected?
At this point, the design is to have them be separate,
So they will have
but
to
in
walk
close
outside.
proximity. Yes. Next slide, please. This is the conceptual drawing the architects have provided for those. We're looking at 5 8-1-1 classrooms, eight students to 1 teacher to 1 aide. That would not be the configuration of how we would staff those rooms, but that configuration for state ed requirements gives us a little more space. It also gives us greater flexibility as times change and needs change on how we use those spaces, right? You can use a bigger space for things that have to go into, that are only required to go into a smaller space, but if you have a small space and you want something to put a different program into it, you don't have the capacity to. So it gives us more flexibility. So those are the classrooms on the top. On the bottom is the support space. So office for counselors and psychologists. There's an administrative office for the coordinator for the program, cool down rooms, things like that. as well as the mechanical. You will note about two-thirds of the way down the corridor from left to right, there's a double egress door. That's to separate the young students, K2 program, 3-5 program, from the middle and high school students. So those students would be separated for safety purposes. Again, this is the initial conceptual drawing, same design of the building on both campuses. Slide, please. In terms of age-appropriate play spaces, what you see on these two on these pictures is basically we do not have appropriate play spaces for students with special needs who are age 5 to 12. The playground spaces there, those are, I've been describing them as oversized little tykes, plastic playground equipment, which is designed for preschool students. So early childhood, pre-K students, that's ideal for them. For the older kids, the only thing that is there on both campuses is a single swing set that holds 4 swings. That's all that they have. And there has been an ongoing request for better play space coming not just from staff, but from the students themselves. Slide. And if this was an interactive PowerPoint, I would click on that and you would actually see a video from the students that they put together with the help of their staff, describing the spaces that they would like. The students actually put together a presentation for our board last June, including a 3-dimensional diorama with trees and all of the types of components that they would want to see included in it, shared that with our board in June. This is really a student-led, bottom-up effort and request, not top-down. Phase 2 is really a nuts and bolts, addressing the physical plant needs of our 2 campuses. Even the programmatic items there, upgrades to the gymnasiums and CTE shops, are nuts and bolts. It's replacing our gymnasium divider. It's upgrading a air handling unit in the auto body shop at Harold campus. It's upgrading the dust collection system in the building trades shop at the Pole campus. The rest of it is driveways, parking lots, sidewalks, roofs, building envelope issues. At Harold campus, we have aggregate wall panels that were built in the early 70s with asbestos that are starting over time, have just worn out. We're starting to get water penetration into the building, so we need to address that. HVAC, plumbing, fire alarms, etc. Now for the financing piece, slide. We have been working with fiscal advisors on these scenarios. There are a number of ways that BOCES can engage in capital projects, and we would actually replicate the process that we used 15, 16 years ago in the 2006 referendum and the subsequent project from that, which is that the BOCES would take on the debt with the Dorm Authority of the State of New York as name. And then the BOCES would be responsible for making the debt payments. The component districts would make the payments to the BOCES. Component districts' share of that debt payment is based on enrollment, or our WADA. And then aid is generated on that payment for the component districts based on their aid ratio, as well as how much of the project is qualifies for aid. And that then BOCES facilities aid, unlike programmatic aid. Program aid for BOCES, you spend the money in year 1, you get it back in year 2. So you have your CTE tuitions this year, you get the aid back for the expenses in the following year. For facilities, it is current year. So it all works together in the same fiscal year. In fact, you don't even have to write a check because the Dorm Authority intercepts the aid payment between Albany and Norwich. And so it's deducted from the aid payment that comes to us that is then distributed out to you. So everything is taken care of all at once. Slide. So the sample borrowing scenarios that fiscal advisors has helped us with is we borrowed $14 million for phase one to address the programmatic needs. First payment in 25-26. So we have a 3-year overlap, 25-26, 26-27, 27-28, when there's already existing debt. It's estimated that those debt payments would be $1.1 million a year. The BOCES currently has in its budget that is approved as part of our capital budget every year, a $500,000 capital maintenance budget. We would take that money and we would not do things like recent projects have included remodeling the cosmetology labs at both campuses in part to make them compliant with Department of Health requirements for manicure tables, upgrading our welding shops at both campuses. We would hold off on any of those sorts of projects. Probably the most parallel would be if you do the $100,000 capital outlay project.
Yeah, I'm just gonna chime in. So their $500,000 capital maintenance budget is the same thing as local districts, $100,000 capital outlay project every year that you can build in. So it's the same thing, just one is BOCES, one is component.
Which, as a former business official in a district, I can tell you $100,000 is nearly enough.
It doesn't need to be required.
So anyway, we would take those dollars and help offset those payments. So the $1.1 million payment in those 3 years would be offset by $500,000, so it would be $623,000 that would be split. Phase two would be a $20 million borrow, first payment in 28-29 after the existing debt falls off. Slide.
So just really quick, just point of clarity, the $500,000 would be dedicated for those first 3 years annually to offset that 1.1 million each year.
While we're overlapping with the other payment.
Well, it's over, yeah.
Correct. And depending on what our needs are beyond that, we would consider continuing to use that $500,000 until we have a need, or phasing it out slowly. So we would apply $400,000 in 1 year and then $300,000 and start to get back into our process of doing those sorts of projects.
All right, so just really quick, so the $500,000 BOCES may utilize that past the first 3 years to
Past the
offset.
first 3 years, correct.
That's not guaranteed though.
It's not guaranteed, no. So this is what that would look like based on the assumptions. And this data comes from fiscal advisors. And fiscal advisors has reviewed these presentations that we're doing to vet the debt. So right now, in purple, you see the existing debt payment is the net cost after state aid is applied for the region, and this is region-wide, so this is all 16 districts combined, is $1,005,000. For the 3 years of overlap with phase one, that number would go up to 1.28 million, and then come back down to 1.22 million for years starting in 28, 29 and onward. Now, I do want to point out, because it was asked at one point, 28, 29 is not, 29, 30 are not the last years. This continues on for 20 years beyond that, okay? Or 18 years beyond this. So that's just the starting point. Slide. In terms of the impact directly on Sidney, this is what it would look like. Currently, $67,500 of your budget for the BOCES goes to the existing debt service. That would rise to $90,000, so an increase of just under $23,000 for the 3 overlap years. And then it would go up again to $99,000 for the subsequent years. Now, the impact of this varies by district, and these numbers are not set in stone, right? This is based on current enrollment. This is based on current aid ratios. This is also based on the project being 75% aidable. We're estimating that number is conservative. We're hoping to get it closer to 80 to 85% aidable. But I don't want to stand here and tell you it's 85% aidable and your share will be less, and then have to come back after SCD approves it and say, oh, by the way, it's only 75% aidable. I'd rather come back and tell you after SCD approves it that, remember I told you it was 75% aidable and 25% local share, it's really 85 and 15.
Can I ask a question about the enrollment? So you said our payment is based on enrollment. You mean our enrollment of our school, not how many of our students go to BOCES, correct?
Correct. Your enrollment
So-
as a district.
Can I ask, out of the 16 school districts, where are we in terms of?
I'm actually have that coming up.
Okay.
It's a great question.
Next slide.
So next slide. We're not quite to the enrollment
Okay,
piece yet.
okay.
But what does that mean, that gap between the current $67,500 mean and what it will look like in 28, 29 when the payment is now $99,000? What does that mean to your property tax payers? For every $100,000 of value, they would see an increase in their property taxes of $7.29. So that's what the impact. The reason why the average is $3.24. Some districts are higher, some districts are lower than the $7.29, but the regional average is $3.24. So $7.29 for a $100,000 property. Next slide. Now, this is where I start to get into the weeds a little bit, so I want to use a simplified example before I put up the Sidney numbers. The interest is estimated to be 5%, and this is a 20-year loan. We're projecting that both phases of the project will be 75% aid eligible. So the local share of the debt payment is the debt payment times the district's enrollment number, right, as a percentage of the region. In this case, for the simplified version, the payment is $1 million. This district has 5% of the enrollment of the region, so their payment is 5% of $1 million or $50,000. The aid that comes back is based on the district's payment, $50,000, times 75% that the project is aid eligible, times the aid percentage of for BOCES aid. So in this case, for simple math, $50,000 times 75% times the district has an 80% BOCES aid ratio, which equals $30,000 in aid. The result is a $20,000 local share. How does that look for Sidney? Slide, please. Well, for Sidney, for those overlap years, the phase one portion of the overlap, $1.1 million payment, less the $500,000, leaves $623,000 for district share. Sidney's enrollment currently is 9.39% of the regional total. So Sidney's share of that $623,000 payment is $58,562. If that project is 75% aidable and your BOCES aid ratio is 81.7%, 58,562 by 75% by 81.7% is 35,884, leaving a net local cost of 22,678, which comes back to that's about what that's what the numbers on that bar line graph showed. The difference between purple and purple plus light blue was the 22,678.
I'll quickly just scroll back up here just for people that could be viewing at home. So this is what Mr. Avery's talking about. This is our current debt payment as we speak right now. We're at $67,494. And then with the net cost of what he's talking about for phase one, this is where it jumps up to the $90,172.
Correct.
For those first 3 years of phase one. Correct?
Correct.
That's this net cost.
That's
So it's not the only cost, right? It's in addition to, so this is just phase one added on to the current capital project debt service payment for City Gas.
And then for 28, 29 and beyond, the projected debt payment is $2.7 million. Again, 9.39%. Enrollment leaves the Sidney share at $256,000. Multiplied by 75% and 81.7% is $157,000 in aid, resulting in a net cost locally of $99,249. Scroll back to that other one. That's what you see in the green plus the light blue is $99,249.
And that would be for another 18 years past it. So a total of 20-year borrowing period.
It'd be 15 beyond that because after 15, the light blue would fall off and then there would be 2 more or 3 more of just the green.
And that tax cost that you gave before, that $7, was that based on the first 3 years or the last 17 years?
The $7 is for 28, 29 and beyond.
Okay, for the last, for the
Correct.
final 17. Okay.
Yes. And that's concurrent. Now, again, I want to emphasize, these numbers are not static, okay? Your enrollment changes year to year relative to everybody else. I mean, it doesn't change a lot, but it changes. Your aid ratios will change, interest rate will change, between now and the time we bid this out. And then property values will change over time. So all of these things are in motion. So I don't like to say, this is what it is and this is what it will be. In 5 years from now, the numbers may look a little bit different.
Now, the 16.72 you have for the second phase of the infrastructure improvements, the parking lots, the HVAC, all that. That looks like a very generalized list. Do you guys actually,
We
to
do
get to
have,
that 16.72,
Yes.
do you guys have specific items
Yes,
that
we
you
do.
guys are gonna address?
that list is based off of our building condition survey. Just like the local districts, the BOCES have to complete a BCS report that we submit to state ed. And then we took that report and we prioritized which issues, working with our architects, are most urgent. And this is all of our priority 1, priority 2 items off of those lists.
Okay, so the slide was just kind of a generalized.
Exactly.
that you
Yeah,
guys
it's not
actually
just,
do have
oh,
a
we
list.
know that we got bad parking lots. So
Yeah,
it is, I could break it down quite a bit more. It's multiple pages when we put down all of the items. But you can find, I believe that our building condition survey and our 5-year plan are also on our, should be on the website.
Mrs. Green, I just want to answer a question, talk about enrollment, just kind of give you a snapshot for the component districts, 16 component districts. We're the third largest, Norwich City Schools being first. Don't quote me on the numbers, but I'm gonna call it like 1,500. In the Monroeville is just over 1,200. Then Sidney Central School District is just under 1,100, it's like 1,187. And then it drops off pretty substantially with some of the districts after that, so.
Okay, well so it's sort of a 2-part question. So knowing that we are one of the top largest school districts, so essentially basically one of the 3 largest schools taking on the biggest share of the debt because of our size. Some of the programs, the infrastructure improvements, I get, right? We all have that. It's been a long time since another project, but some of the programs through the TLC, I know those are a lot of things that we already offer. We're very big on inclusivity here. We want to keep as many kids in-house as possible. And I get everybody sort of shares the services that we get at OCs, but to take on that large of a debt for something that I don't know that we would necessarily use. I'm not saying we wouldn't use it. I'm sure there's circumstances that we would, but we've been making a big effort to be as inclusive as possible. I guess I'm just wondering, is there any circumstance or situation where you may separate the projects? Like, yes, you want to do the TLC and build the buildings and do it, and that's great because that sounds like something that BOCES is really committed to doing, but I don't know. I think I would almost be more supportive of talking infrastructure right now.
how many students would we be sending up there?
Well, I don't want to misquote anything. Right now.
Yeah.
Probably, how many,
To TLC and Lighthouse?
to program specifically or just in general for the new programs at TLC?
Yeah,
Okay.
approximately.
And
then would there be like a relative cost savings back to us by not having
We're about 5
services?
there now.
Right, that's what I was gonna ask. What happens to the waitlist kids? Do we
just
have
kind of,
additional aids? And then I think that's what you're getting to. Are we saving costs?
so I think I'm going to answer your question. So the TLC program, the programs that would be housed there, right? We have about 5 kids there, and I think we have 2 that we would send, 2 to 3 that we would send out, if we could.
And what are we doing for those children like right now? Like what's the cost for us now? I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out, too, is like, is there really a savings to the district or not? I mean, are we still gonna be having the same?
Something like this, I would say, no, that would be such a marginal number. I mean, it would be such a small number. With the cost savings, not really.
What are the kids that are waitlisted, what are they receiving for services right now?
We don't know that those are our kids that are waitlisted.
Or
That's
in
just
general,
me.
I would say we would have probably 2 to 3 that are waitlisted certain programs. That were either waitlisted or ones that we would send if we could. So I don't want to say waitlist. It's not like they're necessarily on this. We know that there's not capacity there, room there, so we just don't. They probably attending right here, right now. Right.
Yes.
They don't have any, special help or there's nobody.
And just every, but not necessarily, not maybe what you're talking about, not maybe aides, not maybe therapeutical rooms, right? They're attending here as normal. We would just send if we could.
So is it better for the child to be there or here?
Depends on the individual
It's gonna
child.
be tough, but I mean, that's ideally what we're looking for is what's best for them.
Yeah, I would say that there are probably, I think we have about 5 roughly without speaking right, without the number in front of me right now.
Sorry, I'm looking at a bill.
Okay.
3.
3, and we might potentially send another 2 to 3 maybe. To those specific programs that would be housed in the TLC.
Can I ask another question about that kind of, so I'm sure part of this project was probably a space use configuration, right? I mean, we keep hearing how in New York State is, lower number of people, we know school districts across the state are seeing lower numbers. I have to imagine BOCES has also seen a decrease as well as everybody else. So to make another 25-year commitment to add to buildings, like, have you looked at, I guess I'm curious, why or why not does your current configuration not work for this?
We're actually fairly full. We just moved out the adult ed programming at the whole campus into the Norwood Center that we're renting spaces, which is the old Norwood City High School downtown that used to be in that lower E wing, so that we could create the space for the pilot. So we really don't have excess capacity on either campus in order to empty classrooms to be able to just implement this right now.
So you've seen an increase in enrollment when everybody else.
Yeah, we have seen an increase, as I said, we have seen an increase of about 50 students this year to last year. And our CTE, we have one of the highest enrollment rates in the state for CTE enrollment for BOCES CTE programs. So we are still seeing a fair number, a good number of students coming in. And I know the CTE numbers, I think the 3, which operates on a 3-year rolling average, is actually going up next year in terms of that average.
So unless this is your first presentation, what have been concerns from other districts or individual taxpayers that you've heard? What are some of the negative things you're hearing and how are you guys addressing some of them?
There's a number of, probably the biggest is staffing, I'll be honest. How are you gonna staff for this, right? You already have staffing shortages. We have staffing shortages. How are you gonna address it? And we are, that is part of it. When, I can tell you, when we opened that pilot program, as soon as we had staff, we had kids. And we were able to secure staff within a month after making the commitment to once that space was ready. That we were able to get that pilot started last spring. So staffing is a big concern. Part of it is we're working on career ladders, so LTEs becoming substitutes and eventually qualifying to become fully certified teachers, right? Part of it is going to be through efficiencies, right? We take 1 or 2 kids out of these existing programs to go into this program. Maybe we can consolidate and move one of the staff members over, or in the case of some of the districts, they've got a special ed teacher that's dedicated for for a small number of kids that would be enrolled into the program, and we would take over their contract and they would begin to work for us, right? So that's another way. I know Mr. Dewey would say that there's discussion at SAD, at the DS meetings, about the something I'm not privy to, but he has said it at other presentations about the certification requirements and looking at that as a way to try and get interested people back into the field. So that's probably the first biggest question. The second question has to do with operational costs. And I think this gets a little bit to what you were alluding to, which is how is it paid for? Operational costs, just like our existing special ed programs and CTE programs, is a tuition basis, right? So each of our programs is a self-sufficient budget. It's basically, unlike a school district, we are running multiple separate little corporations, right? Revenue has to equal expenditures. So the tuition would take care of all of the operation costs, which includes teaching staff, support staff, square footage, custodial, utilities, all of that is factored in and is included into the tuition, which is a use base. So if you're sending 3 students, you pay for the tuition for 3 students. Right now, that tuition is about $57,500, which is low. We have students that are going to programs out of the region that the tuition that is being paid is in excess of $100,000. So that's because of the high needs of and the number of professionals that have to be involved in these programs. So the operational piece comes from it. If you don't send students, you don't have costs. Kind of, which brings me back
Except
to
for
your
the
original
tuition.
question
Yeah.
about how do we, about whether or not you can opt out, because if you're not sending kids, why would we pay to support the building? Unfortunately, the way BOCES capital projects are done is it's a cost shared amongst all of the districts. BOCES does not have a fund balance reserve to fall back on, right? So everything that comes into us in revenues is either expended for the programs and services we provide, or it's refunded at the end of the year. Right? We have a few different reserves that are very limited, things, similar ones that you have for ERS, TRS, or liability reserve. And now we have a capital equipment reserve that has been approved by the districts. And so we can start to generate reserves so that we can start replacing things like our loaders and some of the heavy equipment in our conservation. But other than that, we don't have a 4% fund balance cap. We have a 0 fund balance cap. We don't have any unreserved, undesignated funds available to us. So how capital projects are paid is determined by the state, and so there's really not an opt-out.
And did BOCES consider waiting until this current, because, I mean, we're a pretty solid school district, but I know many in our region are not. So did BOCES discuss waiting closer to when that additional debt drops off?
We did, but and that, based on the feedback from Mr. Bullock and the other superintendents in November, that's why we phased it the way we did. But phase 1 is a programmatic need. We're not going to be able to have those programs open and available to provide service to students for 2.5 years from now. So if we wait another 2 or 3 years beyond that, how many students? It's really driven by the needs of the students, which is why we're asking for phase 1.
In some of the space issue could be too, if you remember back, BOCES used component districts classrooms for a number of years. If you remember our junior, senior high, or junior high building, I believe we had 4 classrooms, 5, what was it?
3 at the end.
3 at the end.
Yeah.
Started off, I think, maybe with 5 classrooms that we rented to BOCES, and we housed a program up there, and then it worked down to be 3 just because of enrollment. And then DCM and BOCES, I can't remember where they all were, GMU, Sidney, there was a bunch of them, Valley,
Yeah.
right? And then BOCES just kind of took a different philosophy, right, and took them back in-house, right? So they're not, correct me wrong, they're not in component districts anymore. They're housed back on BOCES campus, if I'm not mistaken.
You are
Most of
correct.
them, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And
that was
I
probably-
saw that the question and answer about the transportation issues of having things at different schools.
There were some logistics issues. That decision was made I've been with BOCES now for 2.5 years, so that decision was made about the same time I came on board. So I'm not familiar with it, so all I can tell you is what has been relayed to me, which is that the logistic concerns of timing for buses going all over the place, right? And having them just go to the 2 BOCES campuses certainly makes that easier, because then they have to be timed back out for a release back to the local districts, right? The second piece was the supervision piece. One supervisor going between 5 different districts trying to oversee programs and not being able to provide good administrative supervision to that program led to some challenges, which then leads to problems for the principals at the local buildings. It did create some issues, in those districts. So that those 2 came together as reasons to bring the programming back into the BOCES campuses.
No,
And that's why we're looking to ideally have these programs also on our campuses.
even not to put you on the spot, but I'm 100% going to put you on the spot. Is this the format that you're most in favor of bringing this to the voters? So like, obviously you said as superintendent, you guys got together and you worked on things and you tried to break things out and stuff like that. Is this the format you're most satisfied with, or did you have a different proposal that you would like to see more?
Actually, if I can jump in, even if you want to save that conversation for.
That's a later conversation.
Yeah, because really my last slide is, what is our ask of you? And our ask of you is to ask whether or not we have, this is not endorsing the project and saying, go out and vote for it. We're saying, do we have your permission to move this forward? We don't need a formal resolution. We would like you to have the conversation yourselves with even to share that insight with our district superintendent, and we'll continue the conversation at the CSA meetings on the 27th, where all of the superintendents from all of the districts will ultimately represent their districts and make a more formal recommendation.
So January 27th, they vote?
So
discuss?
January 27th is a regional superintendent meeting. And let me back up a little bit just in this process. And I'll kind of answer your question, but not really, Mr. Miller. As part of the request was to get out all of the component districts so that you hear the presentation, so that we can have these conversations, so that I can take the information back to the regional superintendent meeting on January 27th to provide the next steps for the BOCES. Do they move forward with this referendum in March, or do they not? Do they change it up? So that was one of the big things, is for all of the districts to have this opportunity, right, to hear the presentation, to have some dialogue with it, and then for us to take back that information.
The second ask that we have is, if we do have a referendum, if we could use one of your facilities as a polling site for the community. We'd love to have 18 polling sites in each community, in each of the 16 districts, and then one on each of our campuses as well.
That was requested all the component districts too, is to make sure there was polling site in each component districts, not just the BOCES campuses, but 16 districts and BOCES campuses.
I understand you're under an aggressive timeline here. Just one more question about that.
Absolutely.
Why wouldn't this be part of our normal election in May? It's so close. Like, is that timeline for what you need to have done? So it makes me a little, if we do decide to move forward doing a vote like this outside the normal, it's hard enough to get people to come to vote, let alone a special election. Like, is there a reason why we're not looking at
A lot of it is driven by what we are currently already seeing for SAD approval timelines, in terms of the number of weeks and months that it takes. In order to get to a good bidding environment, we want to be in early to mid-winter next year, so that when we're going into the spring of 24, we get the best possible results. If we delay the vote that much longer, then that puts us further behind the other projects, because at SCD, it's a first in, first out on the approval process, right? And so that then puts us behind the 8 ball on bidding, which then potentially could escalate costs. And I do want to make a quick mention on phase 2, we have built in inflationary escalating into that $20 million. That has been accounted for as part of this project.
Can you elaborate a little bit on prioritizing phase 1 over phase 2?
Personally, as the person who oversees the buildings and grounds, I would love to have both phases. Our buildings are functioning, right? We can do roof patches and that, but at some point we will need to replace roofs. So we can stopgap between now and 28, 29 with our facilities with the needs. What we're seeing on the student side is immediate needs, and we're already concerned about the 2.5-year lag from now until when we could really roll these programs out. So that's what's driving phase 1 over phase 2.
So all these things in phase 2, right? The wall panels that come on. Did you say there was asbestos in the wall?
Yeah, they were built in 71. It's an aggregate wall panel with rock and then asbestos adhesion to the structure.
So everything in here though that would be delayed until 2026 is no immediate danger.
No. Probably the most immediate danger is we've got a 30-year-old boiler at the support services center right now, and we're going to look at using the next $500,000 project before that payment would kick in to address that issue.
Mr. Avery, just real quick. So everything that would happen at the support center, right, that's not aidable because it's not kid focused. So
Correct.
just to kind of give you an idea, right, about the 75%, because to me, that's a little bit of a question, is the 75% is only aidable, right? We always try to maximize that. So anywhere where there's not kids, if you will, classroom space, that's an unaidable spot. If you remember, we talked about the facility up on top of the hill, that would have been completely unaidable, even what we were trying to do with classroom space or PE. So just to kind of give you an idea, that's where that falls into play, that 25% would be unaidable because students wouldn't be at it.
Now,
Not classroom space.
with that, there is an allocation for what's considered incidentals, which is outside work. So we are within the formula for all of that pavement work would be aidable. But Mr. Bullock is right. The work at the support services center would not be aidable. We have to look at the building aid units and work with SED on whether or not. So that's part of the determination. Moving forward, we may consider making those not as separate standalone buildings, but as additions to, which may then result in a different building aid unit calculation. We're going to try to maximize that. In the 2008-2009 project, it was 98% aidable. And yes, we would love to get there. But we are being as conservative as possible at this point. Any other questions?
I think to just put it out here, just for things that we're looking at, I say where it's like Carrie and I and, Mrs. Warner and Steph Albert, and when we're looking at the cost of special education programs, that is real. So just something to think about. I'm just talking about students with special education IEPs. I'm not talking about perhaps maybe gen ed students that may go to the therapeutic center. So we're just talking about the cost of programs. Something that we look at, we look at every single scenario. And one thing I think is important to look at is what they call like high cost aid. So for example, Mrs. Johnson just kind of pulled this up just so I had the most accurate numbers. Ms. Warner, thank you very much. Is we're doing this behind the scenes to kind of give you some information. So just take, for example, high cost aid. So like what we're talking about building it. So we have transportation aid at 90%. Mr. Ray, we talked about the 81 point something percent back for BOCES aid. So our high cost aid is just under 80%. I think it's like 79% or so. That's on after you hit a threshold of $36,474, then you get back 80% on that student's placement. So if it's a $100,000 placement, right? Anything past that 36,000, right? Then you would get back 79% on that placement. So what we analyze is what is in a sense, you hate to say it, but what is the cost of the program? Can we do it here more cost effectively? So we look at that every placement, every situation, and that does start to weigh in when you're talking about placements in the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 range. Is what can you do different? Because that's one child. Can you create a classroom like that? So things that we talk about, just in every situation. We're doing a kind of internal audit right now, our special education program. We started back in August, but I think that's important just for too, that that's what we're behind the scene doing, just to look at that. So
there's a possibility that you might find it more fiscally sound to keep them here, keep the students here.
Potentially,
Send
for sure.
any up there, even though we're paying for the building space up there, you might house them all.
Potentially, for sure.
Because it seems like, in the years I've been on the board, like you either have them here, you have them there, and you move these kids
It
around.
fluctuates based on the kids' needs.
And it seems like it's just based on the financial interest more so than if you, sometimes like you don't have the proper staff, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, is not only is it fiscally sound, but it's also in the best interest for.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece to just to point out is that we're not making, if there's a program that's going to be best for the kid, regardless of price tag, we're going to find a way to do it. But at the same time, we're going to do it, and then we're going to say, can we do it here, right? More cost effectively, for sure. But to answer your question, yeah, it fluctuates based on the student needs, right? I'm a firm believer, once you find the right program, wherever the program is, right, it is a great fit. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to figure that out. It takes a couple of years to find out what that right program is, whether it's here, whether it's BOCES with, offsite campus, residential place. But I just wanted to be able to share that with you too, is there's aid on some of those programs, but you do have to start to look at what are the cost of those programs. But I just think it's important piece of the puzzle.
Do you have any idea, and maybe not today, maybe it's for a later update before we talk again, but do you have any idea how many of those, what our cost is for any outsourced programs currently not going to BOCES but not here? I know you said something about.
That would go to one of those programs instead?
Yeah, you
And
talked about
outside
a lot
the
of people,
region.
right? Like, do we have students we're sending outside the region?
Yes.
Like, do we have a way to, are those services that would be able to go to this new program?
So we have some students that attend full-day programming at ONC BOCES. Right, so they head out towards the Milford campus. One of those students would not be attending a DCMO program. The TLC program is not what that particular student needs. The other two students, one is a junior this year, so he would be graduate before these programs were available. And the other student, we would evaluate if it would make sense to transition them to DCMO, or due to their success in the ONC BOCES program, would we maintain them in an ONC program?
Does that
You just
answer?
have a few. Yeah, I just was curious if it's a huge cost for us or a huge number, maybe not cost isn't the correct word, but is it a big number of us for us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there are students in the region that are also attending programs at BT BOCES, for example. But I also know that
But not.
not from Sydney, but from the region. But BT BOCES is actually at the point with their capacity that they're not accepting any students from outside of the BT region. And I don't know if ONC is at that point yet, but.
Depends on program.
Well, and part of the decision here is, this is a 20-year building, basically, you're looking at. Our enrollment may change, the needs may change, the number of special needs we have may change, where 1 year we take it in-house, and because we have enough kids that financially we can staff it, we can do everything, and save the operational costs, even if we're paying the capital costs. But 3 years down the road, we may only have 1 or 2 kids that we want to send to BOCES and pay the tuition, the prorated portion of the operational cost. So sometimes it's having that capacity available has a cost,
If, let's say hypothetically, right, it passes and our enrollment drops, right? What is our contribution? Our contribution stays the same from when it was voted in, correct? It
I
doesn't change
need to
anymore.
verify that. I'm not positive on that, and I don't want to give you a wrong answer. Let me check, and I will be back to you.
But it's also our enrollment in comparison to the other districts'
Correct.
enrollment.
Yeah.
So our enrollment drops, but if the rest of the region drops more, we could still be in that top tier.
And vice versa, like if we go up, then will ours
Would we increase?
That's my question.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not gonna reevaluate it every year or not?
I need to verify whether, once that's approved.
Is it a fixed or variable?
Is it fixed? I'm inclined to believe it's variable, that it changes year to year. But I'm not positive.
Yeah.
So I don't want to misstate.
It's a good question to see what that is over the next 20 years.
And I know whatever, it's, as a school district, we've always made the best decisions based on the needs of the child. It's never, I don't remember, I've been on this board a long time. It has never been about finances in terms of special education. I just think we've historically, especially I'd say in the last 10 years or so, we've done a pretty good job maintaining. And I guess I don't see a huge fluctuation of having to suddenly need 30 spots or 20 spots. So I'm thinking about, in this terms, I'm thinking cost per student. Yes, we only pay the tuition if our kids use it, but committing to another 20 years of debt on top of what we have for something we may or may not use, I guess is sort of what I'm thinking. And I know we're a part of a region, but I also have to just think about Sydney. We're responsible
Absolutely.
to these taxpayers and this community and this school. So
Absolutely.
that's sort of where my thinking is coming from.
If there are no more questions, I really appreciate your time this evening. Thank
Appreciate
you
it, Bob.
for giving us the opportunity, and I look forward to hearing back through even on which way.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, Bob.
And our Boy Scouts just got a great lesson on capital projects. They are so bored right now.
It's some of these meetings only 20 minutes.
All right, ready to move on? Okay. All right, we're gonna move on. So resolved upon the recommendation of the.
Sorry, general updates.
Oh, sorry, sorry.
I'd like to recognize Boy Scout troop. Thank you very much for being here. And I know you try to come annually to the meetings, and yes, these meetings are not typically this long, so I appreciate you being here. But that's part of real life, right? When you're talking about making really thoughtful decisions for a long-term impact. I think that's something that just resonates, whether it's a capital project for a school district. We just talked about 20 years worth of potential payments, right, that a school district would have to tack on. Not that it's good or bad or indifferent, but think about some of those major decisions. That's why, going through like the life skills that you're going through now, to be able to have critical thinking skills and problem solving skills and the ability to collaborate as a team, just like what the board is here, the administrative team is here, right? Those are invaluable skills, right, that you're learning through all these processes, because these are real life decisions. So, embrace those opportunities. I just appreciate you being here. Thank you. Just a couple quick updates is in the week leading up to break, we had Spirit Week for K-12, K-6 and 7-12 had their dress up days, which were awesome. We ought to have PJ Day every day. It was awesome. The K-6 Pride Assemblies that we previously spoken about. Our 7th and 8th grade classes participated in the Minute to Win It Challenge, which is really cool. And then, of course, the famous 9 through 12 Spirit Day challenges of our classes. And I must say, the 12th grade was victorious this year in it, and they were super excited. It was a lot of fun. Great cultural event. Well done. Just give some shout outs to Catherine D'Agostino, who did a tremendous amount of planning for that. Miss McNamara, Miss Rogan, the team of people who put on a great day that afternoon beforehand. And if you remember that weather, we snuck out that dismissal very, very carefully. And just want to say thank you to a great group of bus drivers that got our kids home safe that day. It was something. So it was something. And then we're planning another family engagement activity or night, if you will, in the elementary school on February 16th. More information to follow, but it's the Winter Warrior Wonderland. Just went out. They talked about Mr. Wood and Mr. Hanson talked about their faculty meeting last night, taking proposals from staff. But again, it'll be a great family engagement night. And the next thing, just update on the Smart Schools project that we had mentioned about. I was going to have a presentation here. We're not quite ready to be for the board to approve it and to go to a public notice. But remember, the Smart Schools Act met with the district safety team to be able to, or stakeholder group to be able to communicate what that could be. That's the upgrade of the PA systems in both buildings. So better communication in individual classrooms and the common areas, display panels in each classroom, in each one of the common areas. Common areas means lobbies, cafeterias, gymnasiums, things of that nature. So Mrs. Warner and I are scheduling a meeting with a Smart Schools representative from State Ed Facilities Planning, hopefully the next week or so, to just make sure that we got our T's crossed and the I's dotted before we bring it to the board, hopefully maybe in February. And then after the board presentation, it would go to a 30-day public notice, very similar to like the emergency plan that we do in July. So to go 30 days, then the next board meeting, the board would approve that project then to be submitted once we got it all figured out, or once we had all the documents done for submission to State Ed. He would approve that after the 30-day public notice. I don't want to say we'll shoot for February because these projects take anywhere from 12 to 14 months to approve through State Ed, so it's not something that's going to be rushed, but we want to make sure that we don't want to leave money on the table. We have about $320,000 in Smart Schools left over, so we want to make sure that we try to maximize and leverage every dollar out of that because it's a one-for-one reimbursement, if you will. So just I wanted to give an update on that. So,
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the minutes from the regular Board of Education meeting held on December 13th, 2022.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the personnel consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the Board of Education agrees to settle a tax certiorari proceedings commenced by Seritage KMT Finance LLC in accordance with the terms set forth above and in the form approved by Farrar Forenza PC, and hereby authorize Farrar Forenza PC to execute such settlement documents.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion.
Is that the plaza down behind McDonald's?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to transfer $67,249.06 from the tax certiorari reserve to the general fund to pay Seritage KMT Finance LLC for a reassessment in taxes due to a property sale.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion?
Great example of where you have a tax certiorari reserve.
Well, it's a little less than the 70K you would budgeted.
Good job.
Thanks for managing our expectations.
You betcha.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the contract from Highland Associates Architectural Firm as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
These are, this is the contract with our architect for the pod project in the first grade, very similar to the junior senior high school we did last summer.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Board member comments?
Any update with the possibility of changing the name?
No, other than, I shared that, the letter that I sent to legal counsel at State Ed, that just said continue to work to that. No, still open for public comment. Public comment will close, and then regulations, we're hearing regulations will come out in April of what school districts will need to do. No update other than that. Other than, I think behind the scenes, I think we have a pretty good plan that once it came out, we would communicate. Working with a representative from the United Nations to help educate our school and our community, and then using maybe a platform like Thought Exchange that we did during our last strategic plan to throw out to all various stakeholders for ideas, right? What might that be? And then maybe you take your 100 different potential ideas and then chisel it down to your top 25, your top 10, your top 3, and then do a revealing, right? Make it a fun process for all involved. Will we have to? I'm not sure. There's dialogue going back and forth between, let's say, like Walton Warriors, for example, that do not have a historical connection to an indigenous nation, right? It's not a warrior, it's not a dream catcher type of mascot that they had. It's very similar to the Green Trojans, Maine Animal Spartans, those types of school district names and mascots. Where ours does have a historical reference to it, even though in 2018 when we did do the rebranding, prohibiting the Dreamcatcher and the Warrior had its mascots, it still has a historical reference to it. So no update. We'll wait till what comes out of that. I know some school districts are arguing why some districts will be able to keep the Warrior name and maybe some won't. And what we're hearing is just the historical reference to, right? So,
When they come out with the guidelines in April, how fast would we have to implement?
Yeah, if you've seen the changes when they first came out, it was pretty bold. It was a pretty bold process. You had to make the change by the end of the 22-23 school year. Otherwise,
I was just going to say,
otherwise I
that
lose
doesn't
my
give us
job.
much
that's
time.
it.
And all of you get upseated, right? No, you can do that voluntarily. But no, they were pretty bold with their comment. And now they talk about that you have to have a plan in place, right, for the 24-25 school year.
Okay.
So it's kind of evolved a little bit. Again, that was pretty bold that they put out there.
The fire superintendent, that was the first time I went.
That was a pretty aggressive comment. I remember that came out on Twitter at like 5:49 on a 5:47 on a Friday. Right? Yeah.
The last question I have is the United Nations representative, how do they feel about the changes we've made and our situation individually?
Haven't talked to the person specifically yet. So there was a couple of school districts that reached out to I think I maybe shared this in an update with the Binghamton University Archaeological Department, who took a little bit to get back to me, but they did a little bit of digging. The Delaware County is broke up into 3 nations representative, one Oneida Nation, the Delaware Nation, Delaware Mohawk Nation. So I have a name and contact for the Oneida Nation that is kind of taking a historical reference for school districts. So we have the name of the person, I have the email contact. So kind of wait to see what's there.
And the fact that we made our change, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
You know,
And just as a point of reference, I interviewed some kids. I happened to go to the modified volleyball end of the year party and was just talking to them like, hey, talking to the kids because they were asking about it, right? They're savvy. And so I asked them, I said, well, what is our mascot? And they're like, we don't have it. I said, okay, check. Right. And then what is our logo? And they're like, well, yes. Right. That's all they know. Right. When you think about the middle school kids, they're back in, late elementary, right? They don't know, right? They don't know any different. So I thought that was a pretty good reference point. But we'll see what happens. I would, again, if you're going to put me on the spot, Mr. Miller, with what we do, I would say that we probably will have to change it. Yeah,
as many times as I can.
I would be prepared to change them. I would have a plan in place. I would not sit on our hands and not have a plan in place to be able to do that. I would think that we would have to.
The Sidney Rumble.
Well, actually, and that brings up a good, so I have a multi-meeting on Saturday and they've asked me to talk about this, which I am planning to. So I guess the question was, does the Alumni Association, it's not a part of the school, but do they have to also change? Because it is, they said the alumni, does that mean they have to take down? But all their stuff is artifactual.
Yeah, it couldn't be linked to our website.
Artifacts, so.
Yeah, some of the things that came up, and I would want to get clarity on that. So it's like, but it's connected to our website, so it can't be connected to the school district like that. Link to our website, our alumni room over there, pretty much everything in there would have to go.
Yeah.
Including some of the shirts.
I did not know, and I was like, we probably would have Photoshopped them. If I had been told we were getting photos tonight, Mr. Boyd.
I wasn't gonna say anything about that.
Good thing. Call it out, everybody.
You do that with purpose.
It's not illegal.
You're not helping me out here.
Hey, good luck in your future.
Yeah, I already asked her to wear that.
Yeah. But again, is it serious? I would absolutely have a plan as a school district to make sure, and again, I'll present something with you, right? Is to have to change it.
Okay.
That's a tough thing though, because there's an emotional attachment in the community to it.
Oh.
That's a tough part. That no matter what you choose, there's going to be, people have to change their entire wardrobe.
The day that they came out, the next day I walked the hallway, I'm out and about, and it was like everywhere I went, I was like, whoa. Right?
Yeah.
And then no matter what you choose, you're lucky to get 30%, vote on it or whatever, out of the different options.
And we'll come back and we'll leave it to you, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah,
All right, any other board member comments or questions for me? Okay. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to move into executive session for the purpose of hearing an appeal of student discipline.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Take everything. Are we gonna come back
We're
out?
gonna come back here and take.
Okay. Okay.